In this episode, Jonathan Parker and I discuss the guest essay in the New York Times, "You Can't Game Your Way to a Real Education" by Molly Worthen. Hope you enjoy the conversation. There's been a movement over the last 2 decades to gamify learning. And when I say gamify, I mean digitally gamify learning, meaning gamify learning on devices, which is essentially an effort to apply the technology of gaming to the process of learning, right? And the problem that the article, advocates for or makes the case of is that those two processes, those two mental processes are not exactly compatible. What's happening cognitively when you're engaged with a game is not compatible with what needs to happen cognitively when you're learning, right? The goal of digital gaming, right, is essentially to keep you connected to the screen, right? And the goal of learning is to engage in some process of thought, reflection, perseverance through a problem, right? And those two processes don't fit well together. And here is the quote. This is from this Emily Churkin, who's quoted in the article. Maybe it's pronounced Shurkin. I don't know. She works with families in schools. Oh, you have her book already? Amazing.
Of course I have her book already.
How fast do you read?
When I already agree with the conclusion, very fast.
So that's, right. I mean, it's like you could read a Malcolm Gladwell book faster than every other book because it just has, right. Okay, I understand. Ready? Okay, so here's what she says, right? She says, when you gamify lessons, you're not enhancing learning, but holding students' attention so they stay engaged with a product longer. That's at odds with child development. Children should not be spending hours on a screen. Okay, so that's the basic premise of the article. Let me get a few more things in here. The issue is that in the last 2 decades, right, this movement's become this very large and profitable industry, right? And the industry has sort of sold itself to schools with taglines like, kids are digital natives, and so we have to meet them where they're at and engage on their turf. They're going to be engaged digitally as adults, so we must train them for this world of digital engagement as adults. And then, of course, there was the great, every school should be a one-to-one school, right? And when I became principal at Bnei Akiva Schools, that was the policy of the school. We'll get to that in a moment. And it was it was something we advertised, right? It was something we were proud of. This is now 10 years ago, right? That we're a one-to-one school. Every kid who comes to the school has to have a device. Okay. So the argument now is this is contrary to what we know about how the brain works, right? The fundamental mistake is replacing what kids want with what is good for them, right? Kids want to be on screens. They love to be engaged with screens, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for them. The analogy offered in the article is kids also want candy. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good for them, right? And here are some of the reasons. You can't learn when you're distracted. Memorization is still important, and I want to get into that a little bit, right? Because you need to actually memorize some information to be able to work effectively in any sort of higher order thinking capacity. And digital learning promotes short attention spans because it relies on these short dopamine hits, these gaming dopamine hits, to keep your attention. So as soon as you withdraw the dopamine hits, the learning actually falls out, and you have not built any of the sustainable tools for difficult learning that does not involve digital gaming. Okay, and so the article sort of moves to schools that have abandoned their one-to-one policies, right? And the schools are trying instead to actually promote friction in the learning process, right? Promote some tension in the learning process, promote difficulty in the learning environment so that students understand the process of learning is, I think in the beginning of the article it says, it's not fun in the sense of this is stress-free time, but it needs to be engaging, right? Okay, so that's the article. Did I miss anything important?
No, I mean, I think it doesn't really focus on gaming in the same way that you started off the summary.
Yeah.
I think that's where the author launches off from, but I think it quickly segues into everything else you're talking about.
Okay, great. You, principal, have decided to take Bnei Akiva Schools, where I was the principal, off of a one-to-one policy.
No. So to quote like Emily Churkin, who you already mentioned, her big line is that she thinks that schools should not be into ed tech, which is not really a thing.
Right.
Those are just games.
Right.
They should be tech intentional.
Okay.
And that's the direction that Bnei Akiva Schools is going to be going, right? It's every kid still needs to have a laptop. They're still going to need to know how to use Excel or Sheets. They're still going to need to know how to type. They're still going to need to know how to use AI. If they're in a class like media arts, they're going to be using computers exclusively. They still need to know how to do research. They need to know how to do all of these things. Everyone still needs a laptop. The difference is going to be that the laptops won't be used in school to take notes. The laptops won't be used in school to take quizzes. The laptops will only be used in school if it is the only way that a teacher can achieve whatever his or her educational goal is in that instance.
So give me an example of what that looks like. Like, what is a teacher who needs a laptop to achieve their educational goal?
So media arts is probably the easiest one, right? Like the entire course is based around digital editing and marketing. And we're not going back to printing presses. Like that would be adorable if we did, but it's not, right? You need to know how to use Adobe. You need to know how to edit those things. The students need to know how to type essays, right? They're not going to go off into a world where they're all going to have typewriters or cuneiform tablets or something. They need to know how to type quickly and effectively. They need to know how to edit. So students will still need to use the laptops for those sorts of things.
Okay. Can we talk about the writing thing for a second? I want to jump into that, right? Because so I've used this year more than ever. I started last year a bit more, but really got heavily into using AI as a tool in my teaching and having my students use it as a tool in their learning, right? And I'm of the opinion that AI is an incredible tool. It creates incredible efficiencies in terms of how you work. I actually think it's a very, I'm not like, so far, every interaction I've had with AI does not make me afraid it's taking over the world in any way. I just think it creates incredible efficiencies, right? And so I don't, well, let me put it this way. What skills, you're an English teacher, what skills from a writing perspective must students still learn, right, on their own, right, that they should not rely on AI for in the learning process? Meaning at some point in the future, they may have AI write an email for them that makes life easier or put a marketing presentation together for them, right? And so on. But what, if anything, is still worth preserving in the old-fashioned process of learning to write, and what could be discarded? What can we say that we used to teach in terms of writing that we can now say, the same way, we're not going back to the printing press. It's not important that kids learn how to have, amazing handwriting the way like the founding fathers did, because they're going to use word processing. Like we know that's a feature of writing. So what could we say is in that category and could now be discarded and the AI can be used for, if anything?
Sure. So I think it actually starts even farther back than those specific skills, right? Like if you're looking at Cooney Horvath's research, right? He was one of the people who was mentioned in the article. So in The Digital Delusion, he talks about research that shows that people who write by hand have better retention and comprehension of the information, right? If you read off of a printed piece of paper instead of off of a screen, you're going to have greater retention and comprehension. So I think even before you get to the skills that are part of the writing process, we have to, like you said before, we're hardwired to learn this way, right? Having AI doesn't change millions of years of evolution about how our brains function. So number one, I think that's where it starts, the reading and the writing. It's before the editing, before the comprehension. In terms of what are the important things that we need to maintain from the writing process, I think, at least from my own anecdotal experience with students who rely on AI for editing and for idea generation do not have a deep level of understanding about what they have put on paper, on type, right? Students who type everything out and then I handwrite edits for them and give it back, and then they incorporate those changes into their writing. When I come back and question them about it orally, they have a deeper understanding of what they've done. Whereby students...
Okay, so let me push on that point.
Go for it.
Why is it important that they have that deep understanding? I mean, I get that they're getting the deep understanding, right? But my question is, what is, like, I hear Horvath's point, right? And I think the way I would frame it is when you learn how to write, right? This is actually a little different than his point, but when you learn how to write, you learn how to think,
yes.
right? You have an idea, you now need to figure out how to organize that idea. And I'm a writer who relies heavily on my own editing, right? Like if you looked at a first draft of mine, it's terrible, right? I actually have someone edit my work. I don't send it to them until I've gone through my like fourth or fifth draft, right? Because the first draft is just a brain dump on a paper, and now I actually have to start organizing it. And it enables me to actually organize how I think, right?
Yes.
By taking that process and putting it down on paper, right? So that's related to this idea of how you comprehend written information. I get that. Why is it important for me to do that? Did I just answer my own question? Probably, right?
I mean, I can answer it using examples outside of the writing process.
Go, answer it.
Right? Like, I know you said you don't feel the creeping doom of AI.
Right.
But imagine we're 10 years, 20 years out from now where people have outsourced all of their critical thinking and just buy whatever AI is selling. I had a student 2 years ago who didn't read the book he was supposed to read for his assignment. So he had AI generate an oral report for him to deliver to the class about the book. He got half of the details of the book wrong, including the protagonist's name, and delivered this entire presentation because he had just outsourced all of his critical thinking to AI, right? That's not the world that we're training our students to live in.
Right. So I agree with that. By the way, I am not, when I say doomsday about it, like I mean, like, I don't see it like taking over the world or, sending us into nuclear war.
No, we'll be too stupid to build the bombs.
Right. I do think, though, it could dramatically impact how we think, right? I think that's already happened, and we'll talk about that. I want to get to that in a minute. Okay, fine. So I have a picture of what you're saying. So for you, writing, and I agree with this, writing and editing are important processes because they force you to organize your thoughts, understand deeply what you're meant to understand. Fine. What about writing a research paper? Learning how to write a properly formatted research paper. Like, this is my example of something that maybe we're not going to need, to learn how to do anymore, right? Like, if to me, the very technical tasks of life, right? Like that we're all part of our educational infrastructure. Maybe it's not so important. Maybe if I have a bunch of ideas and have a bunch of sources and I need to put them into a properly MLA formatted paper, maybe I could just have AI do that. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I have no problem with that as long as you have researched the sources, right? Like, in my mind, the entire value of the APA or the MLA, any of those approaches, is that any other scholar can pick up your work and can retrace your steps.
Right.
If you go to something that is totally unformatted, nobody can reconstruct what you've done. But if you outsource that to ChatGPT, that's not different than outsourcing it as a professor to your TA. I need you to put this together. Right. Okay, good. There are people who make entire careers of putting together bibliographies.
Right. That's exactly right. So now let's extend that, okay, to so how, and this is what I struggle with and am working with. What if, as a teacher, let me actually make the distinction sharper first. So here's our distinction. Our distinction is learning tasks that are building your cognitive ability to organize thoughts and understand what you're meant to learn, those actually need to be separated from AI. And by separated, we mean assessed, right? So, such that students are not relying on AI, right? It's an assessment problem. And we can get to that.
I mean, for me, it's not just AI. Like, the whole ed tech industry is behind it. It's not just AI.
Right. Okay. I want to get to that in a second. So those things still need technical tasks, right? Such as properly formatting a paper or something like that. Those are tasks that really should use AI because they're just time-saving tasks. They're tasks you would have maybe given to someone else at a different point, right? So now, what type of student work at home, right? Because that's where AI is going to be used. I mean, you can control the classroom. You can create somewhat of a controlled setting there. But at home, students are going to use AI. So what type of tasks can be assigned at home that fall into the category of these are things that before AI were technical tasks that students could do themselves but could also get help with. And now they're just getting better, more efficient help with an AI. What falls into that category?
Right. So I actually think that one of the things that a lot of schools are going to have to go to, it's not a new idea, it's been around for 10, 15 years, probably longer, maybe 20, is the whole flipped classroom model, right? Where kids go home, and home is where you do the more rote tasks. You have to read a book. Maybe you have to watch a Khan Academy video about quadratics. Whatever, you read an essay about why we don't pipette by mouth. So you do the informational stuff at home. If you want to get some of that informational stuff from a summary from ChatGPT about how pipetting works, gesundheit hate. That's fantastic.
Right.
And then when you come to school, that's where the real work of education happens. That's where the conversations, the debates, doing the actual problems happens.
Right. Okay. So I'll tell you what I did this year. I'll tell you what I want to do next year. And you'll tell me what you think of this. So what I did this year was I assigned students to select, this was part of a larger project where they were teaching a history lesson to me. They were picking a question that impacts the modern Middle East, and then they were giving me a history lesson relevant to that question. And they had to select 2 primary sources as part of their lesson. I expected them to use ChatGPT to help locate primary sources, right, that are relevant to their lesson.
I mean, there hasn't been a card catalog in a generation, so where else are they going to get it?
So on the one hand, they are not starting their thinking process, right, in a way where they've, been present in the classroom all year. They're thinking, what question interested me the most? Now I'm going to start, let's even use internet, where I'm moving around the internet trying to find articles and actually piecing this together with, the question I have, the history lesson I'm teaching, and the primary sources I'm using. They're shortcutting all that, right? They're really just asking AI to give them suggestions, right? This is, what's a good question to ask about the modern Middle East? How, if I want to create a lesson and I want to, and what will be 2 primary sources for that, right? So they're shortcutting the whole process. It's like the student who would go home and just go to their parent and say, I don't know what to do. I have this paper. I need help. And the parent gives the child the idea to start with, right? So in some sense, there is something lost there in the process that previously existed, right? But on the other hand, it is a technical process, right? It's in some sense, maybe.
Yes. I mean, I think there's some distinctions there, right? It's what you're describing is not that different than an English teacher or a history teacher saying, here is your research topic, or choose one of these 3, right? You've already taken away the kids' autonomy to think through, like, what problem do I want to discuss? You've already told them, no, these are the things from which you can choose. But if a kid went into this totally parv, having no ambition to do anything at all, that's deeply problematic. Like I had this year, with my grade 9s, had to write speeches. And there were 3 kids in each class who said, can I use AI to come up with a topic? And I said, you can, but it's going to be a bad speech because you should choose something you're passionate about. Literally anything. You'll just have to talk for 3 minutes.
But let's focus on that. You said you can, right? So once you are assigning this at home, I know, there were certainly students who were invested in their own topics, who chose topics based on what we learned in class and what interested them and so on.
And those will probably be better.
Those were probably better, correct. And I think what happened with the students who didn't do that is they were able to create an idea, I mean, not a good idea, but then they ran into trouble I'll get to in a moment, right? Okay, but we know that's happening, meaning we know there's something lost in that process. But here's the flip side, right? And I'm glad you mentioned this, the teacher who, gives the students 3 topics to select from. One of the reasons I was able to do this project, say, choose any question impacting the modern Middle East and create any lesson based on it, whether it was something we covered in class or not, is because I used AI in the evaluation process, right? So they could select any 2 primary sources. It actually turns out, interestingly enough, most of the primary sources they found were stuff I was relatively familiar with. But even when it wasn't, and in some cases it wasn't, I was able to use AI to first, summarize the source for me, right? And then generate analysis questions off of the source, and then I would look back at the source, make sure it made sense, what they were asking. So I was able to give the students an expanded menu of options by virtue of the fact that I was using AI on the back end. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Okay, so the students do this, they go home, they get their topic, they get their primary sources. Then they have to come into school and take a quiz on their primary sources, right? So they can get their primary sources from AI, but they still have to know and learn their primary sources. And I would assume, and I encourage them, I said, if you're reading your primary source and you don't understand a line that it says, ask AI to explain it to you. In other words, use AI as your chavruta for this primary source. You could come to your quiz with a printed version of your primary source, right? But that's it. So you have to be able to read and know that primary source. And I as I was reviewing these, I said, next year, I think what I would want to do actually is have them teach me the primary source on video. In other words, put a screen up with the source, read it for me, and teach it to me. Right? So I can actually see and hear them explaining the primary source line by line and then still take a quiz on it afterwards.
Right. As long as you still have the quiz. Right. Because I don't know who's listening to this, but anytime a student is going to give a presentation, there could be some elements of AI, right? So if they're already going to AI to get this source, they could also say, please also give me a line-by-line explanation suitable for a 17-year-old, and then just read that in the video. The quiz is the quiz is the check.
So there's two things. I actually think the video is somewhat of a check, because I think you can tell when a student is just reading verbatim off a line. And then it's true, they'll get, this is the other thing I've learned, with this, the idea that a student should fail, right, because they used AI, I'm if they get a 60 or a 70, because they used AI and so they didn't master their learning anyway. Maybe that's part of my mastery bias, but at the end of the day, it doesn't bother me so much if AI can get you, 60% of the way there or 70% of the way there.
My problem is if you present work from AI as your own, that's when it's problematic to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's problematic morally and ethically. I get it, right? But I don't, as a teacher, I'm not beating myself up to try and figure out a way to make sure that gets caught such that you don't pass, right?
Here's the parallel I draw with kids. When kids ask me what is okay for AI and what isn't okay for AI, I say, if you were wealthy enough to afford a very knowledgeable, very competent tutor.
Right, great, yeah.
That is the level to which you should use AI, right? That you have a tutor who knows everything about everything, who is able to help you find your own way through it. That's a good use.
And historically, when I taught in New York and people were wealthy enough to afford really competent tutors, often those tutors wrote work for them.
Right. So that's a line that a good tutor shouldn't cross.
Right. Of course not. Right. But that happened all the time. Right. And you could tell as a teacher when you were reading a tutor's work and not.
Just like you can tell now when you're reading AI work.
So the problem is not old. It's now just more accessible to people who couldn't previously afford.
Finally, we've gotten equality.
Right. Okay. So I agree with that, but I do think you can mark a student when you could tell when they're being engaging. And my criteria for them is you have to teach this to me like you're the teacher, meaning it can't seem like you are just reading lines to me. You have to be able to offer multiple examples that seem extemporaneous and so on. Now, it's possible a student could do a great performance off of that. Most of them can't. Most of them need to sort of understand it. The reason I like the idea of them teaching it to me is because what I found this year with the quiz is a lot of them didn't actually learn their sources inside, right? And relied on summaries, right? Now, most of them got tripped up when I would ask them to interpret particular lines from their sources, but I still thought the idea of maybe pushing them to teach it would be worthwhile. Maybe. Okay, fine.
I would even like it if you went farther and said, it's going to chew up a lot of your class time. But if they have to teach it to the class, that's something else. Because then there's follow-up questions, right? If you can't answer a follow-up question, then you really didn't understand.
The truth is I could do that, now that you mention it. I can't do that for one assignment, right? Because that will just chew up too much class time. But I could do that over the year.
Yes.
That at some point over the year, everyone has to teach one source to the class. So at least then they get it. Then in the final assignment, they actually know how to do what I'm asking them to do at home. As a teacher, same idea. AI is efficiency, right? So first of all, I mean, this I think is just a no-brainer. Now we are all doing, hopefully, more written in-class assessments as a result of the fact that the at-home writing assignment or reflection assignment or whatever you're doing is not as reliable. You get a page back of boy, chicken scratch, right? Definitely boys have worse handwriting than girls, so I think that's fine to say. You get a page back of that, you scan it and put it into AI, and it will transcribe it for you, and it will do a really good job. I mean, stuff that I can, and I've been doing this 20 years, I'm pretty good at reading students' bad handwriting, like stuff that I can't read at all, it's doing. And when it can't figure it out, it gives you brackets and suggestions for what it might be. And it transcribes it verbatim, so you can still provide a communication mark based on that. So transcribing, I use AI to transcribe student work. I will use AI to give me an initial evaluation of student work. So if students are, let's say this is their quiz on their primary sources, AI already has the primary sources that I put in to generate the questions. So I say, give me an evaluative feedback of this. I read through AI's evaluation, I read through the student answer, I read through AI's evaluation, and I would say probably more often than not, it's pretty on with what I would think. Sometimes I have a little bit of a different way of looking at it and so on. Next year, I actually want to load my lessons into AI, and I actually write out my lessons. I do that just for my own, again, to organize my thinking, right? So I write out my lessons. I want to load the documents I have for my lessons into AI, and I want to actually just put student quizzes directly into AI and have AI mark the student quizzes, right? Based on the evaluative standards that I give it. Give those back to the students. And by the way, now I can mark almost immediately, right? And give those and say, hey, if you don't agree with what AI said, then bring it to my attention, right? And I'll take a look at it and evaluate it separately. What do you think of that?
So I was with you for the first half.
I know.
There's a teacher I know in Cleveland, and that's exclusively, she actually adds a step to how she uses AI in the first step of your process, right? She has the kids hand in their chicken scratch, and then she scans it, and then she hands that back to the students and says, you read through how this was transcribed and you edit it, right? So the kids have to—
Right, but I'm not an English teacher.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
But I'm saying this gives the kids a chance to actually think critically about what they themselves have written.
Oh, okay.
Right? To make sure that what they've said is an accurate reflection of who they are. With regard to having AI mark the work, I'm really uncomfortable with it. I think the marking of student work is not a rote task, right?
Okay, let me qualify one thing before I say that, okay? So I agree with that if it's higher order thinking skills. That I think you still need to mark yourself, or at least review what AI did and give your own comments on it, right? But I'm talking mostly about knowledge work. In other words—
if all you've done is replace this with a much fancier version of the Scantron that you and I had when— I assume you had this when you were a kid, where you filled in the bubbles. Yeah. If all you've done is—
I'll give you the concrete example. So the knowledge component of my course, going back to the article's contention that memorization is important, and I tend to agree with that. We'll talk about that. It's a good thing to jump off of next. So let's say I believe memorization is important in some areas. So I'll tell you what I think. I teach history of the modern Middle East, right? We go through, let's say, 8 countries, right? Modern history of 8 countries. What does that mean in practice? It means I want kids to know about 6 stories from each of those countries, right? So what does that mean? I mean, I want you to be Shabbat table conversant in the story. That's my standard, right? That's the standard for mastery. So someone brings up the 1956 Suez Crisis. You have a sense that involved Egypt and Israel and Great Britain and France, and there was a plan, and it backfired on them because the United States and the Soviet Union found out, right? Like, that's it. You're not a deer in the headlights. You have a sense of what happened there. So the way I assess that is I want students to write that story for me. Tell me the story. Write it out in full sentences, right? In a long answer format, right? If you didn't get it right the first time, you just got to start again and rewrite that story out, right? So if you can show me that you can sit in sort of an isolated setting and tell the story to me, then I know you know that story. You've committed it to memory, right?
Yeah. If all you're assessing is
right,
if all you're assessing is like spit back knowledge, then yes, then that's no different in my mind than a Scantron or a TA going through it. But if you're asking AI to mark kids' thinking and their analysis, that for me is where I would draw the line, because that's a deeply personal expression of who they are. And that's something that you as the teacher should be engaging with as a dialogue instead of farming out.
I agree completely. Okay, we're on the same page. Let's talk about memorization, right? So one of the points the article makes is that memorization is still important, right? And that digital learning really takes memorization off the table.
Yes.
And I've heard arguments like this really for the last decade or so, that we're in a post-memorization world. Everyone has all the world at their fingertips. They don't need to memorize anything. And the argument against that, I think, goes as follows. At the end of the day, when you are using your higher order thinking skills, so what are higher order thinking skills? Let's just identify them, analysis, evaluation. So analysis, I'm going to give you my definitions. I mean, I think they're rooted in real definitions. Analysis is detecting signal from noise, right? So I can look at some data set and I could say,
pull something out.
Yeah, this is important and here's why it's important. Evaluation is having informed opinions. Synthesis is being able to take two ideas and develop something new from them. And application is, what it sounds like, is being able to apply something you learned to something new. So in order to use your higher order thinking skills properly, you have to have some accessible foundation, right? It doesn't mean you don't look things up, but nobody starts with nothing and jumps into higher order thinking skills, right? And most of the time you don't start with nothing and pull out your phone and say, give me something, right? Most of the time, in order to be a person who can engage, let's say in a conversation like we're having right now, you have to have some foundational knowledge. That foundational knowledge, and this is, I think, gets a little shadier, right, is best demonstrating to students that foundational knowledge is important, is best accomplished when you can force them to memorize key basic information that they need to memorize. Is that right? Do you agree with it?
Yes. I mean, I think the simplest place to make that argument is in math and in the sciences, right? Like if you never master your times tables, which sometimes I still struggle with, but if you never master them.
I never master them.
But you will never excel at higher order math. You might be able to muscle your way through trig and SOHCAHTOA, but you will never understand it in a deeply innate level because you are missing everything fundamental that those were built on. Like there is no foundation to the house of math. If you went to the doctor and you said, you brought in your son and his eyes were yellow, and the doctor had to then look on ChatGPT, what are the reasons a kid's eyes might be, that's a doctor you should stop going to. There are certain...
Articulate why. I agree with you. And obviously, instinctively, I think a lot of people would be like, yes. But why? Why is it that doctor is not? What does it say about the doctor having memorized, right, these various symptom categories, right? And in real life, we know that, most cases for, let's say, a pediatrician, it's actually really, might have been memorizing at one point, but it's typically just what they're used to seeing, right?
Yes, I've seen jaundice, now I've gone from yellow to, but if I've seen jaundice 1,000 times, right. I know what this is.
But it's still memorized. It's there. So what's the value in that for the doctor, as opposed to just looking it up in ChatGPT telling the doctor?
Because how can you propose a treatment plan for something that you don't actually know what you're talking about, right? How can you think critically about the symptoms that you're seeing if you don't understand what those symptoms are?
Right. In other words, so in that case, even let's say the doctor sees something that is not typical and does have to go look it up. But when he looks it up, he remembers. It triggers that memory of, oh yes, I learned about this and now I understand what it's doing in the body and all that stuff. So the memorization is key. It's not so much even that you might look something up. It's that you've built some foundation of knowledge.
It's the fundamentals.
Right. This is Shabbat table conversant. So somebody brings up Sunni, Shia, Islam at the Shabbat table and says something ridiculous. It triggers a memory in you and you're like, oh, in grade 12, history of the modern Middle East, I learned that. And that doesn't sound right to me. Right. And now I can go look it up and make sure.
So it's simplest, I think, to explain with math and science, but it's true across the humanities as well, right? Like if you're sitting down and you're listening to a podcast and you are lacking the fundamentals that underlie or underpin their entire conversation, you will have no idea when they have gone astray. You will have no idea when they are just making things up as they go along or building the airplane while they're flying it, because you have no fundamental knowledge whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And I would say this was really interesting is having done it this year and having done it as a skill in and of itself, meaning those quizzes really are just about knowledge or just about recall and understanding, right? Yep. And you can see, and the students themselves can see, am I good at that or not, right? Like, am I good at, and that's a really important self-awareness skill to have. So some students could do, easily 6 questions, 6 stories per quiz, no problem, memorize it all. Some students had to do 3 questions at a time, right? Some students, when they got really desperate at the end of the year, were sitting down and doing 1 question at a time. And what I said to them is, you're still showing recall and understanding skills. I'm not measuring how great you are at memorization. I'm only measuring that you can memorize this, right? If you can memorize it all at once, okay, so then you're going to get that's going to be an exceeding mastery type of score, right? But the base level is just that you can memorize each story individually. But they got to learn about themselves, how good they are at committing things to memory, which is relevant, right? Because if, actually speaking of being a doctor, like that's actually a job where having a really good memory helps, right?
And it's crazy that it took them till grade 12 to actually know that about themselves.
Right.
But that's because for so many years, we've been told no more rote memorization. No.
Right. And that was also painful for them, right? So that process, for a lot of them, the process of realizing that I can't get 6 stories down at once and I've got to do 3 stories at a time was like a painful learning process, which gets back to the point of the article, that learning has to require some pain, right?
Yes, I don't know pain, but definitely struggle.
Pain.
Life is pain. I think we've covered a lot of what underpins my concerns about technology misuse in the classroom. I mean, we didn't really talk about ed tech at all, but I think it's been sold to us as something that it isn't, right? Even starting so far back as a Chromebook, right? Like, if you look back at the history of the Chromebook, it was initially marketed as just a regular laptop for people to buy off the shelves, and it did not sell well because it doesn't have widespread functionality. When did it get picked up widely? When they started selling $300 laptops to schools. Well, this is a cheap way to get to a laptop in every kid's hands. But they're a corporation, right? Like, they're not an educational institution. Why do they want every kid to have a Chromebook in their hands?
Well, so they can get everyone's data.
They can get everyone's data. Yeah. The kids now all understand Sheets and they understand Docs. They don't know how to write in Excel anymore. They don't know how to write in Microsoft Office, right? Because the kids have been sold Google from the time that they were young. Like, they're a business. The same with Kahoot, right? Like, I'm sure you have young kids. I have young kids. They do Kahoots in school all the time. Kahoot, you don't learn anything from a Kahoot. If you get the wrong answer in a Kahoot, nothing. There's no incentive for you to go back and learn it better next time. It's a game. You get a dopamine hit, or you don't, and then you move on. So I think EdTech has been fundamentally sold as something that it isn't.
Not all teachers are good teachers.
No. It's crazy talk.
You might even say a lot of teachers are not good teachers, right? Teaching is, unfortunately, I mean, this was, a colleague of ours gave a speech at the end of the year, which I really liked. And I liked it because she called our attention to the idea of teaching as a profession, right? And the fact is that teaching is not a profession like other professions, right? When you think about professions, plumber, electrician, lawyer, doctor, all of those professions have features of advancement and mentorship and growth in your practice of the profession, right? You don't become a plumber and just start fixing things right away. You apprentice, you learn, right? You grow into your own person. There's real mode for advancement. And a teacher, you are a teacher in the same way you were year 1 that you are in year 10. I know obviously you become better if you care about what you do, but there's no professional advancement apparatus. In fact, in every school I've ever been a part of, you get paid more just by teaching for more years, right? Yep. And accumulating more degrees that we know well don't translate into being a more effective classroom teacher. They might if you can use some of the information effectively, but they don't necessarily translate, right? So we don't treat teaching like a proper profession as it should be, and we don't pay well enough to draw the best people, right? The best possible educators into education. So there are bad teachers. Does ed tech help fill the gap left by a bad teacher? And I'll give you my example, okay, as a personal example. So my son is a disengaged student, right? He was in grade 5 this year, and he's not engaged with his learning. Learning isn't exciting or interesting to him. Recess is interesting to him, right? And he had a science test this year. And the teacher sent home just like this blob of review material, right, for the science test. I don't know what was done in class. Like, I give the benefit of the doubt that there was review done in class. He wasn't engaged with the review, right? And we find this a lot. Like, as a disengaged student, we are pushing him at home to learn what he didn't learn in school, right? And then he does okay on his assessments, but we're exhausted as parents because we feel like we've done all the work of teaching him, right? So my wife's going through this and she's getting like frustrated. And like eventually she just puts into Claude, she works with Claude, I work with ChatGPT, we each have our preferred AIs. She puts into Claude, she puts the review sheet into Claude. She said, can you turn this into an engaging study tool for a disengaged fifth grader who likes video games, right? And that was it. It was the total prompt. It put together an interactive slideshow for him using, game-related themes, and it worked. It was an incredibly effective study tool. And it actually, now after he engaged with the game, we closed his laptop, quizzed him on it, made sure he knew the questions. Now, the fact that the school was doing entirely memorization, there was no attempt at higher order thinking skills in the set, but that's its own thing. But at least on this point, he was able to more effectively learn that. Now, I would argue that getting that giant stack of unengaging review material was the first error, right, in the learning process. And there could have been many non-digital ways to create more engaging review material, right? But having seen that, the fact that we were able to generate something that was engaging using a screen fairly quickly was actually a really good tool. So, and this is, when you approached me about the change in policy, this is kind of the feedback that I gave you, which is, well, what are you going to do about the bad teacher who really needs the ed tech to sort of fill the gap between what they can't do themselves in the classroom?
So I actually, the cynic that I am, understand the gap that you're describing from the other side.
Okay.
I don't see ed tech as a productive way to fill the gap. I see it as a crutch that teachers have relied on instead of engaging the kids in the learning process, right? So I have walked by classrooms and I have seen a teacher standing at the front, pontificating on something and gesturing at something that he or she has drawn on the board. And the front two rows of the class have kids looking up at the teacher, nodding along and writing in their notebooks. And the back two rows of the classrooms are kids, eyes glazed, staring at a screen that has no educational benefit whatsoever. And the teacher has used it to pacify the kids. It's like walking by a classroom out of Brave New World or something where the kids are on Soma and they're just like, nope, I'm out. And the teacher's fine with it because there are no behavior problems in that class.
Let me sharpen that point. Is the teacher fine with it, or does the teacher need it? Right? Because if a teacher can't effectively manage their classroom, and you and I both know that is the hardest art of teaching to acquire, is the ability to be outnumbered, 20, 25 to 1.
The inmates run the asylum.
And figure out how to manage that group. And that is not a simple thing, right? So let's say the teacher can't. Now, here's the scenario where we could maybe you're the optimist and I'm the pessimist, right? But if the front two rows are engaged and the back two rows aren't, but if the back two rows had their pacifiers taken away, they'd be screaming and crying and bouncing off the walls. You've now just ruined the learning for the front two rows. So instead of getting a 50% learning clip, you're getting a 0% learning clip by taking away the pacifier.
Yes, you are 100% correct. So the theme for next year for all of our professional development, for all of our PLCs, everything from start to finish, from August until June, is going to be on two things. It's going to be on engagement and on management, which, as you allude to, are two sides of the same thing.
Okay, but you're talking like a principal now. And I know you are a principal, but it's like, our PD is going to be devoted to this because in the history of schools, whatever we devote our PD to,
it always works.
Works 100% of the time.
Yes.
80% of the time it works every
time. Because yes, taking away the pacifier will be problematic. Like you alluded to before we came out with this new policy at the school, I printed it out for teachers and had them walk around and edit it and give feedback. Nobody was opposed to it. everybody was either parv or in favor of the policy. But like you, I don't think they thought through the negative impacts on behavior that are going to come from kids not having laptops in class anymore. So the teachers need to get better, right? They need to start actually doing their jobs.
You're banking on this. And by the way, I really hope you're right. Someone came to me at Kiddush the other day, like having read some of my stuff, and said, is basically your argument that all we need are better teachers? Like, I'm like, yes, that is it. That yes, the whole thing changes. You don't need big buildings. You don't need fancy facilities. All you need are better. You don't need administrators. You don't need anything more. No. You need just better teachers to improve learning.
So I have a colleague, I mean, you have the same colleague, and he recently said to me, I haven't found a nicer way to frame it. It still sounds yucky when I say it, but the premise is good, I think. He says that teaching in a private school specifically, we are in a service industry, right? Where parents send their kids to us to get them an education, not to get them a grade,
right,
but to get them an education. And it is our job as the service providers to find a way to get the kids to pick up what we're putting down, right? We need to find a way to educate them. That is what our job is.
Great. So this is another segue, but actually I wonder if that's actually our job. Let's come back to that in a second. Okay. I want to harp on that point. What is the service we're actually providing for our parent body? But I agree with you. I aspire to provide that service as a teacher, right? Like I didn't get into this profession for any other reason. Well, I did get it for lots of other reasons, but as I've grown—
For the money. It was definitely for the money.
I was confused in a lot of different ways. But as I've grown in this profession and sort of figured out what my goals and vision are, it is aligned with that, with the idea that students should learn how to master learning challenges that are presented to them and understand who they are as learners through that process. Fine. But here's where I think you and I might differ, and I can afford to be pessimistic where I think you need to be optimistic. You're banking on the fact that forcing the issue with EdTech, essentially pulling the pacifier away, pulling the gap filler away, right, from the teacher, will force the teacher to become a better teacher. And my cynical question to that is that actually possible? Now, bear in mind, you're the principal, I left being principal. So we're each coming at it from our perspectives. But is that realistic? Like, are we actually going to get better results, or are we going to move backward?
I don't think that everybody will be good at it all at once. I think that would be crazy to think. But I think we will have a core of people, and you could probably tick off their names at the school we're at. There will be a core of maybe 15 to 20% who will be deeply invested in improving their practice. And my goal would be to take that 15 or 20% from this year, and by the end of the year, grow that to 40. Next year, we start with 40. By the end of the year, grow that to 60. And there will be somebody who have been doing this for so long, and they're stuck in one way that they won't change. But I think that people will change, because nobody wants to come to work every day and be frustrated and sad. Like, everybody will want to find a way to make their life at school work, to make it meaningful, to get their job done.
Right. So once you force the issue, you're forcing the frustration and sadness, and that will then, those negative emotions will require people to do better.
This is not just an educational problem. If you allow kids to have laptops in class, there's a whole host of mental health impacts that come along, because if you can have Instagram on your phone,
right,
you also have it on your computer. If you have WhatsApp on your phone, you also have it on your computer. There's Cooney Horvath, he had a line, if all you have is a hammer, you see everything around you as a nail. And he says the same thing is true about technology, that if kids spend the majority of their time using technology for social media, for gaming, for chatting with their friends, there is no way you can give them technology in the classroom and suddenly expect them to like, oh, now it's an educational tool. No, it's still gaming, it's still socialization, and you just can't turn that part of them off.
I actually think the article did a poor job at that, because there's one line in the article, I can't remember where, and I noted this also, where it said that it's a fallacy. There's a fallacy that we need to prepare kids for the world, right? Because adults learn differently than kids. That's true. But I actually think adults are just as much at risk of not properly learning things and engaging with material as kids are.
Right. I think the difference is that just evolutionarily, I'm not a biologist, but I've listened to enough biologists on podcasts.
That's a great line for the world today. I'm not a biologist, but I've
literally
listened to them
counter
on
to everything I just said. But that during the teenage years, starting from when kids are 5 till they're 16 or 17, those are the years that their brains are the most malleable. So yes, can you and I go into some brain rot doom scrolling of YouTube shorts for 90 minutes? For sure we can. But it's not going to fundamentally change our wiring in the same way that it will to the kids.
Granted. But you don't have to, you and I have both been at teacher meetings, right? Where it looks like the worst version of what you have in a classroom if you allowed unlimited device usage.
I'm pretty sure I said it out loud at a recent faculty meeting where a teacher who was presenting had an online activity. Everyone took out their phones and all of a sudden, blah, 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 blah. Right. And just the learning stopped. Right. Everyone's brain turned off.
Right. And I think that's the lesson. And okay, so that brings me to another point, which is, so I've had this struggle this year. So part of what I am doing as a teacher trying to get every student to master their learning is to get to the bottom of the students who have no desire to engage with their learning, right? Like it's really great when you have a motivated student who wants to master their learning, who's willing to take the test 2 or 3 or 4 times until they master it. Yep. But there's some percentage of students who have no interest in doing anything. And that to me is a spiritual problem, an emotional problem, more than it is a learning design problem, right? Although there may be some elements of learning design in there too. And part of what I see as is these are young people who've given up on themselves as students, right? They're and I teach grade 12, so this is the end of the line for some of them. Whether they'll go to university or not, it's still the end of the line in a certain way. And they're not interested in engaging. So one of the problems I've had as I've thought about sharing, let's say, as a teacher, some of the spiritual insights I have had in my life that have impacted who I am and how I focus on my goals and the vision for what I want to become, is that those accomplishments were hard won, right? Like I got through my 20s and my 30s with, a fair amount of emotional suffering, like, maybe, more than some, less than others, I guess, right? And I came to those insights through that pain, which is how you come to insight in this world. And now there's this like cottage industry of like Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and it's accessible to everyone. And one of the discomforts I have with that is those insights, when I hear them on a podcast, they resonate with me, but they only resonate with me from the experience I've had. And I can't convey that experience to my students.
No, that is something you have to live. You cannot say it.
So now take it back to the disengaged students, trying to get those students to engage. I find it very hard, right? Those students are going on a journey now. They've made that decision to disengage. I don't know how to get how to convey to them what I have learned through that sort of painful, self-aware experience, right? I know how to love them. Like I know how to make them feel like I'm in their corner and I want to help them, right? And I think a lot, like I had students who gave me feedback at the end of the year, like, I know you wanted me to do this and I just didn't do it, right? Like I got, like you conveyed to me your care for me, but I just chose not to, right? I did my cost benefit analysis and realized I'm not interested in this. That's where I find this challenging. Like how do adults who are distracted on their devices the same way kids are, who can't control themselves, who haven't gotten to a place where they can separate themselves from these tools that are these tools, these things that are deleterious to their learning, right? How are we going to convey to students not to do this?
Right. So I think part of the tension there is the idea that you raised that failure might be what teaches the kids that they need to change. But it also might be the thing that teaches them like, oh no, I am a failure. This is who I am. Why do I even bother? Like it's not worth It's not worth the effort. Because they don't know. I don't think you can teach the importance of failure to most kids. I've tried to do it through an analogy with the kids. talking about sports or talking about the weight room, right? Like if you go to the weight room, what is it that you are doing? You are working out to failure. And when you work out until your body fails, what does it do? It rebuilds back, it builds back bigger, it builds back stronger.
Anti-fragile.
That's how it works, right? In sports, you don't just go out and just start playing the game. No, athletes go and they will shoot thousands of free throws. Not all athletes, probably only basketball players. They'll shoot thousands of free throws to get proficient at it. And they will, as they progress through that, they will miss fewer and fewer free throws. But I find the same struggle you do, getting kids to innately understand how what's true in the weight room and true in the gym is also true in other areas of your life, that you actually need to work at things to get better. It goes back to a model that you have talked about before of schooling, where working to mastery shouldn't be in just one classroom, right? Working to mastery should be how the entire school operates, that it doesn't make any actual sense that we're advancing a kid from grade 1 to grade 2 if they're only 55% proficient at grade 1. They should stay in grade 1 until they're 80 to 85% proficient.
Right. I mean, I would just quibble on we should stop calling things grade 1 and grade 2.
Correct.
Because that's what creates, oh no, they can't stay in grade 1. That would be horrible socially if you left a kid back.
Yes.
So just stop calling it. I mean, we do this, I mean, I'm gonna make this point again, I probably made it here before, but we do this with reading, right?
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Everyone masters reading,
yes.
right? And everyone masters reading because we accept the fact that it's expected to learn how to read at age 3 and age 9. Like those are the ranges, right? But that can happen. I didn't learn till probably 7 or 8. But I was on I have a language-based learning disability. I was on the tail end of that. But I learned how to read. And there was never an option that I wasn't going to learn how to read. And there's no reason we shouldn't create a full K-12 curriculum of cognitive skills that are like reading.
Yes, that is how the ideal school should be structured. But we don't live in the ideal, we live in the real.
But so let's go to the real for a second, because this gets back to what I wanted to talk about at the beginning, which is what are parents actually buying? What product are they actually purchasing? Because I think part of the reason, let's go to the kid who we're talking about.
Pretending it's not a Jewish day school. I think because that muddies the water.
No, I want to talk about Jewish day school.
Because the spiritual part of that, I think, makes it
okay,
messier.
But that's why we're going to talk about it, because we are embracing the messy. Also, all we know is Jewish day school.
That's not true. I went to public high school.
You went to public high school. That's true. All right, fine. But in Buffalo.
Yeah, I think that's the most public high school you can get.
So the kid we're talking about, the kid who's disengaged and goes to the gym, is on the basketball team, gets the idea of working toward a goal and having to sacrifice and put in effort, but does not do that in their cognitive, intellectual skill building exercises in school. That kid has a perception of why this is not valuable to them, why this is not worth their time. And let me put this stronger, because it's not just their time. This isn't worth the pain and struggle that they're going to need to go through. They encounter that pain in various instances through their educational journey, and they just don't want to do it anymore. They don't want to put in that work. That child, right, I believe is part of a system that has implicitly and explicitly told them that their purpose for being in school is not necessarily to succeed at these cognitive and intellectual skill building exercises, that they are okay and they're good enough and they should be happy and they should be totally feel fulfilled, even if they're not succeeding at the thing they're spending 90% of their day ostensibly doing, right? Or that the building is designed for them to do. There's a quote at the end of the article I'm going to read. And this defines this as part of the problem, right? With how ed tech became part of education. To call the right shots, however, teachers, administrators, and families need a clear vision of what education is for. It's no accident that American schools fell hard and fast for ed tech, while the old consensus about what it means to be quote, college and career ready was unraveling. For decades, culture war debates over American history and science curriculums have consumed public schools. At the same time, many researchers have called the Common Core national curriculum standards a failure. Even elite private schools now struggle to define their purpose, to figure out what mishmash of personal taste and identity categories should replace the politically incorrect Western canon. Even highly educated parents don't put a lot of thought into the deeper purpose of school, Ms. Drygas, the English teacher in Texas, said. They just don't think about how to get their kids into they just think about how to get their kids into whatever college they want to get into. So it has been comforting to think that everyone can still agree on one thing: the more innovation, the better. Most schools have no guiding ballast anymore, Dr. Horvath told me. Tech filled the void for a while. So that's an interesting framing, right? It places tech in this role of, as schools writ large have lost sort of their orientation of what their purpose is for students, what service they're actually providing. Ed tech was just a convenient thing that swept in. Let's examine that for a moment. Not so much the ed tech side of whether that's accurate, but have schools lost their way? I would argue they have. And let's talk specifically how that's impacted Jewish day schools or Jewish high schools.
Right. So, I think, not speaking about the Jewish side of things, I think if you asked a lot of, it's even implied here, or stated explicitly here in the article. If you asked a lot of teachers, why do they high school teachers, why do you have to learn X? Well, because in university, you're going to have to do X plus 1. Obviously, you have to know X. But that doesn't actually answer the question.
Nor is it true, actually.
Right. But you hear the same thing in middle school. If you were to ask a grade 8 teacher, well, why do you have to teach them math this way? Well, because in high school, they're going to have to learn such and such a thing. So I think, yes, most educators or most schools don't really think carefully about, to quote Simon Sinek, like their why, right? What is it that really is my purpose? I actually would argue that the Jewish study side of things has a much better handle on it, right? Like if you think about the shlichim who come in to work in schools, they are entirely mission driven, right? Like they are here. They know my goal is that every kid I impact will have a personal relationship with me and through me with the modern state of Israel through a religious Zionist lens. Like that is what I am here for. Maybe I'm teaching them Hebrew. Maybe I'm teaching them Tanakh. It doesn't matter. That is their mission. And they know why they're doing it.
This is such a perfect example that you just gave, because that is true. I agree. They come with that mission. They have that clear sense. Nothing about that mission requires a classroom, requires assessments, or requires any sort of formal learning.
Which is why so many shlichim struggle when we try to shoehorn them into the classroom.
Right. So to me, like that I think though, that type of mission, which I agree with is a valuable mission in the broad landscape of V'higata Televincha, right? In the broad landscape of educating your children to see the value in being a part of the Jewish people and being part of the body of the Jewish people, right? Like I get that, right? But the problem is that shoehorning process does not just relate to shlichim. I mean, how many Judaic Studies educators do we know who really don't see their goals as related to skill building and formal learning, right? And I define formal learning this way. It's anything that is targeted and measurable, right? So any skill, right? So in Limudei Kodesh, a skill that is targeted and measurable would be, can you decode a pasuk, right? Can you navigate a page of Gemara intelligently? So many Judaic Studies educators in my, 2 decades, being connected to Jewish education have just moved away from that. And they see their goals more broadly, more in the sense of, I want these kids to have relationships with me, and through the relationships with me, connect to, so for the shlichim, it's religious Zionism, State of Israel. For, another Judaic Studies teacher, it might be the beauty of Judaism, desire to remain observant, whatever it is. And I think we've been largely successful at that. I think those goals, because they're articulated clearly and because they're structured that way, but those goals have also inevitably moved us totally away from all the skill building goals.
So yes, I think that is true. But I think that's also, at least in our school, that's why we stream our Judaics, right? One stream ends up being, I will build a relationship with you through this textual study, through the skills, through this Otzar Milim that you're developing. And the other stream becomes this much more interpersonal.
Yeah, but you know the problem with that. The problem with that is basically it's saying the kids streamed into the personal thing, that's what they need. The kids streamed into the skill thing, that's what they need. But the reality is both kids need both.
Right. But it's a question of balance, right? It's not of balance, of proportions, right? Like if you want to say that one stream has 70% skills and text and 30% focus on like ruchniut.
Why? Why is that your division? Meaning, why not do this? Why not have the day, and I've written about this, right? But, cut the Judaic Studies program in half, have half focused on skills for every student, right? And this is true. We don't have Judaic Studies curricula that are meant for low skill students. Like we don't have a low skill Gemara curriculum.
No, we have a regular skill curriculum and you can get a 60 at.
Right, exactly. So let's actually create something that meets students where they're at, that actually measures progression from A to B to B to C and so on. Have everyone working on skills for half the Judaic Studies time, and then take the other half and make it entirely informal. And make it all about that relationship building and that relationship you want to have to Yiddishkeit, State of Israel, whatever your jam is, right? That to me makes more sense. But what we end up doing is we end up saying the most skilled students need relationship less, and the least skilled students need relationship more.
Not relationship less, relationship different. Like my son, for example, my son had a grade 9 Gemara Rebbe who pushed him really, really hard, harder, I think, than he's ever been pushed in Gemara up until that point. That's because the school he went to before didn't push anything very hard. But he pushed him really, really hard. And my son loved him. And now going into grade 11, he's actually choosing classes based on what that teacher is teaching. Because he loved being pushed in that very academic sense.
Of course, obviously, right? But what happened as a result was, because he was in the 70-30 academic to relationship part, is he didn't have the same relationship exposure, let's say, I'm using that word, as maybe he has enough for him, but he didn't have the same. Meaning he's not getting the same informal experience that the student who was in low Gemara, right, that year in grade 9 got. That student maybe has a different relationship. Now, again, it's hard because we're picking out one kid and saying that. And again, the kid who generally is strong as a student is also going to succeed. I mean, that's going to be self-reinforcing. But when you're looking at the system as a whole, I think that's what we do, is we just take the weaker students and say, you need relationship. And we take the stronger students and say, you need skills. There's proportion to it, but that's effectively what we're doing.
Yes, you have written that article before, but you're talking about a school model that I don't think that people in at least the Toronto or the New York market are going to buy, right? Like when they look at a private school, they are comparing it to other private schools, and they want something that has all the bells and whistles.
No, so I disagree. I actually don't think that's what's preventing them. I just think fear of change is preventing them. Meaning, I think if you still had, this gets back to what do modern Orthodox parents actually want? They want an elite private school experience, right? They want to be able to get their kid into whatever university. Not
Columbia anymore.
Right, whatever Ivy League, or if you're in Canada, elite university program that you can get into, right? If you said to them, our Judaic Studies program is now structured differently, and half the day is skills and half the day is informal learning, I think they'd be fine with that, right? As long as the private school element, the elite private school element was still there. I think this is just a lack of imagination, and it would require real funding realignments, right?
Yes.
So you'd have to fundamentally restructure how you fund schools, and so on. Okay, so back to the vision point. So a school, we agree, right, that Jewish schools, right, have trouble articulating a learning vision, right, both on the general studies side and on the Judaic studies side. On the general studies side, it's the problem that lots of schools are having, right? Which is the only vision we can articulate is you need to learn this so that you can get into the next stage, which just reinforces that the entire thing is about university, college admission, right? Which is actually there's cognitive dissonance there, because the teachers are saying, oh, you have to learn this skill so you can get into the university program you want to get into. But the parent/student wants to get into that university program. Maybe they think that they vaguely know they need to know the skill, but they really just want to get in there for access, right? Like, I want to get into that program because I see that program as my stepping stone and my access to the next. And I have had parents argue with me, right, about teachers marking students too low, even though they didn't disagree that the student deserved that mark, right? This is, let's say a student got a 93 or 94. The parent says, why can't you just give him a 98 or 99? Because he's competing with kids who are getting illegitimate 98, 99s, so you should just give him the 98 and 99. And the parent articulated the argument several times to me this way. Don't we just want Jewish kids to succeed? Like, don't we just want Jewish kids to get into these schools? And in some sense, I get that. That's the perspective the parent's coming from, is this difference between 94 and 99 is not really a difference between my child being able to know this material or not, or succeed in, U of T engineering or whatever program they want to get into. That's not really the difference here, right? So why can't you just do it? Because that's my goal. That's what I'm paying you for.
Yes, report cards came out at 9:00 this morning. At 9:10, I had an email from a parent saying, my son got a 62 in such and such a class. He really needs a 65. And that was the end of the email. But the implication was, can you just give him 3 marks that he never got anywhere? Because the learning wasn't really the goal.
Right. And so that is at the core a struggle. So we are failing to articulate what it means to learn and to be evaluated on that learning.
Well, I think the article itself addresses that, like 3 paragraphs down from where you were just reading, right? They wrote, it's a false picture of the world. Take it from Emerson. Obviously, they have to quote someone fancy. He wrote in Self-Reliance that real education requires a person to learn that there's no algorithm for fulfillment. Though the universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil. So maybe by defining the purpose of school as being the next step, we've obviously done these kids a disservice. We have to define the purpose of school as giving kids the challenges and the tools to work their way through them.
And let's add to that, we are, as teachers, the evaluators of their performance. And that means we are, in some sense, objectifying their performance. It's not the be-all and end-all of who they are as human beings, but we're creating the scoreboard. And they're going to get a score at the end of the day on that scoreboard, and that shows relative to, where the standard was set, how they performed, right? And just like, the Spurs can be upset that, the fingertips of OG Anunoby, won that game for the Knicks. That was the objective outcome, right? It was what it was. We're essentially saying to parents the same thing, right? Like the 94 was the objective outcome of what they earned. Now, granted, there's, it's not quite as objective as scoring baskets, right? But, in fairness, if you follow basketball, lots of fouls are called and fouls aren't called. And there's all sorts of ways the game has subjectivity also. So there's this is the objective outcome, or as objective as we can get. And that outcome is just meant to indicate to you how much harder you have to push the next time. Now, in fairness, I think this is where we fail, right? Because most teachers will say, well, that outcome is final, right? And that's where that's my bone to pick, right? Is that at the end of the day, if you say the outcome, the 94 is final and you can never improve it, that's wrong, because that's not actually the way the world works, right? The Spurs can come back next season and compete again for an NBA Finals and push themselves harder, and they will surely use their loss as motivation to push them harder, right? What we do in school is we say, nope, too late. You're defined by this. You can't continue to push yourself even if you wanted to. And that I think is wrong. And by the way, I also think that gets rid of most tension with parents.
Yes.
If you just go back to the parent and say, let's say the 63, he needs 65, you say, sure, he can have a 65. These are just the things he needs to do to improve his mark.
And that was the answer. I mean, right. I didn't give them the things they had to do. I said, you should go to the teacher and find out what they can do.
Exactly. Yes. But that's the problem. But either way, we're not articulating that. We're not articulating that this is, we're not articulating what formal learning is. We are not articulating the idea that there's a target, there's a standard, there's a struggle to get to that standard, right? And likewise, we believe that actually the value is not in knowing algebra or even in knowing this area of history, even though that's the curriculum we chose to work with, right? That's the clay that we chose to use, right, in building this. But the building is the thing, right? It's actually the skills that you're going to deploy when you are engaged with this material. That's the real value.
Yes, I mean, it always comes back to sports again and again. But if you think about something like the NFL sporting combine, right? Where all the scouting combine, where they're all coming out and they're showcasing a bunch of skills that they will never actually use in a football game. Like, it doesn't matter how much you can bench press for how many reps when you're playing football, but they have a bunch of objective measures of strength, of speed, of agility, and then they rank you. And there are millions of dollars on the line for these people based on where they are. And if you don't like where you landed, you can go back, you can hire a coach to make you get better, and you can do a private workout for whatever teams, and they will come and say like, oh, look, how much this person improved over the combine.
And let's add to that. Some of you will realize that you've reached your limit.
Yep.
Right? And some of you will, and that's okay, right? Like, that is itself informative. Right? Like, when I was in finance, so we marketed a lot to financial advisors. That was just our product our financial product. And I encountered this whole population of college athletes who didn't make it pro, but became financial advisors for their teammates who made it pro. Right? And that was just, there's this sense. They realized where their limit was and they pivoted into something else.
That's a moment of reflection and of self-understanding that I think we want all of our kids to get.
That's high school to me. Like, to me, high school should give you all achievable standards that, all the students. And again, there is a population of students that need extensive supports and integration. It's a much smaller population that actually receives student support, right? Like, it's more like 5 or 10. My sister puts it, and this is her area, she puts it at like 10%. Like 10% of the population actually needs extensive intervention and supports. The rest just need good education, right? So high school should be an achievable standard for 90% of the students. Like 90% of the students, without just in their interaction with the teacher, can achieve this standard. And then that last, whatever defined 20%, 50%, that's exceeding the standard, right? That's where you start to realize, where are my real talents?
Right.
Like, and what might I want to pursue going forward? That's that like sort of self-awareness piece of it.
Yeah, we're done. There's nothing else to say on any of these topics.
Thanks. Have a good day.